Good morning, and welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll continue where we left off yesterday, backing up the beginning of the paragraph where we concluded for continuity purposes. We're reading from the book The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson in the chapter entitled Jesuitical Teachings. Now, we know the teachings of the Jesuits come from Thomas Aquinas, the so-called angelic doctor of the Roman Catholic Church, diabolical individual, and it should not surprise us that from the teachings of Thomas Aquinas and the Jesuits, our Protestant republic is endangered. Now, speaking of those abominable teachings of Thomas Aquinas and the Jesuits, R.W. Thompson says, gathering the papal doctrines from these sources, that is, Thomas Aquinas and the Jesuits, authoritatively commanded by Pope Leo XIII to be considered as the foundation of all Roman Catholic education, a man must stultify himself not to see that the fundamental principles of our government cannot enter into and become a part of that education. Remember, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence are all considered by the papacy, by Thomas Aquinas, and by the Jesuits as being, heresy, rebellion against the authoritative seat of God Almighty on the earth, that is the Pope. See, we threw off papal tyranny when we declared independence. We threw off the temporal power of the Pope when we declared a separation between church and state. We made it virtually impossible for the Pope to be the spiritual head or the temporal power in the United States of America. So these Thomistic philosophies and that of the Jesuits cannot tolerate the fundamental principles of our government, and they cannot enter into and become a part of Roman Catholic education. So you can conclude from this that in the parochial schools that were to replace and to compete with the public school system in this country are virtually against the established government of the United States. They seek to eventually overthrow the Constitution, Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, and all of our Protestant institutions. Now, he says the Roman Catholic youth are forbidden by the papal system of education from accepting as true the principles of the Declaration of Independence or of the Constitution of the United States. Both of these instruments, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, would have to be excluded from Roman Catholic schools, or the Pope be disobeyed. Or if introduced there in the parochial schools, the Roman Catholic pupils would have to be taught that they contain irreligious principles, that the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, contain irreligious or non-Roman Catholic principles, which the Church had always condemned and still condemns. The Jesuit preceptor, assuming that there will be Jesuit teachers or Jesuitized teachers in these parochial schools, these Jesuit preceptors would then tell these Roman Catholic students that the American Revolution was a sin in itself because it was rebellion against the existing principles of monarchical government being that form of government that ruled during the Dark Ages when the Pope was the monarch of monarchs or the king of kings, and all the kings under his rule dictated to the people and subjected them to Roman Catholic canon law, contrary to their conscience, contrary to the law of God, and contrary to common sense. Okay, this is what led to the Protestant Reformation. It says the Jesuit preceptor would tell them that the American Revolution was a sin in itself because it was rebellion against the existing principles of monarchical government, which alone have the divine approval. That all men are not created free and equal, because some are born to command, that is the Pope and his prelates and the kings over whom they rule, and others, that is, you and me, to obey. That governments do not derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Okay? That condemns our entire political system, as it is proposed to be in the Constitution and Bill of Rights. But the multitude of the governed are bound to obey their superiors. That is the Pope and his kings, right? And they, the Pope, okay? The people are to obey their sovereigns, their kings, their monarchs, and the monarchs are to obey the Pope. They are also to be taught that when our founding fathers appealed to divine providence for the support of our national independence, their appeal was blasphemous because the Pope, who represents God on earth, has anathematized the principles they have announced. And with the Declaration of Independence thus disposed of, they would see that's their intent, to overthrow the Constitution and Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. And with the Declaration of Independence thus disposed of, they would be further instructed, these Roman Catholic students in the parochial schools and colleges would be instructed that the first article of the amendments to the Constitution, that is Article 1, separation of church and state, not the separation clause, and the non-establishment clause, no religion will be established in the United States, freedom of religion will reign, freedom of speech and freedom of the press, all of these would be null and void because it is the duty of the government to establish the Roman Catholic religion by law, inasmuch it is the only true religion ever revealed, so says the Pope, and the Protestant religions are false and heretical, that these false religions ought to be prohibited by law. In other words, the Protestant, anything other than Roman Catholic religion should be outlawed, and those holding to those outlawed faiths would be criminals of the state. In other words, the Inquisition would be put back in practice. Those who would not assent to the Pope and to his priests would be summarily executed as treasonous, right? I mean, that's the way it was in the Dark Ages, and that's what they hope to restore. He says that these false religions, these Protestant religions, ought to be prohibited by law, and that the freedom of speech and freedom of the press should be so far restrained as not to allow the Roman Catholic religion to be assailed. Now, I've experienced this on amateur radio. I was exposing the corruption of the Roman Catholic Church and their intent on overthrowing our government. That the Roman Catholic hierarchy in this government, in this country, constitutes a shadow government that oversees, manipulates, and controls the government that you and I see on the television. Okay? And for declaring the historical abominations of the popes and their anti-God Roman Catholic canon law, exposing the Pope as Antichrist, raised up so much opposition among those defenders of the papacy that I was not even allowed to continue. That they intimidated the people from participating in my discussions to the point where there was no one left to talk to. They literally started websites to calumniate and to demonize those who participated in my discussions on amateur radio. And so it soon became a matter of cost-benefit analysis, whether or not anybody could afford to participate in my discussion. They raised up so much opposition that they literally drove everyone out of the discussion. And not having anyone to talk to, then I had to suspend my transmissions or be found in violation of the amateur radio rules and regulations against what they call broadcasting. There's no freedom of speech on amateur radio, at least not when the Roman Catholic Church is assailed. I still have that liberty here on First Amendment Radio, but I think it is short-lived. What I've seen already take place on amateur radio is sure to spread into the Internet. Now again, these false religions, Protestantism, ought to be prohibited by law, and that the freedom of speech and freedom of the press should be so restrained as not to allow the Roman Catholic religion to be assailed, that is, criticized, the authority which the Pope claims for himself to be questioned, or the Roman Catholic priesthood to be subjected like other people to the obedience of public laws. And we already see this blatantly demonstrated throughout the world, not just the United States. Roman Catholic pedophile priests cannot be brought to justice. They're above the law. And a case has even been brought against them in the World Court. And the last statement that I saw from the World Court, they were in a quandary as to whether or not the Vatican was even under their jurisdiction. Well, I can tell you from Roman Catholic canon law, they are not under the World Court's jurisdiction because there's no higher jurisdiction than the papacy. And the papacy says that the priests shall not be subject to the public law, but they are only subject to the Pope and his law as defined by himself, not God. Now, upon the great work of building for themselves and us a government based upon the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, our fathers entered, as we verily believe, under the protection of divine providence. Are we prepared to have the youth of this country taught that this is such delusion as can only exist in the minds of, quote, the dreamers of unprofitable dreams, unquote? Unless we are, we must discard the advice of any alien power, either spiritual or temporal, hostile to the progressive spirit which has thus far assured our growth and greatness, and promises still greater progress and development in the future. A century of experience has taught us that the founders of our government were not only skillful builders, but wise and prudent counselors. When they shunned the pathways along which other nations had wrecked their fortunes, they, as we believe, displayed a degree of wisdom never excelled in the previous history of the world by building up a system of secular government which centers in the minds of the people, which centers in the minds and the hands of the people, a free, intelligent, and patriotic people, entire sovereignty over the laws. Okay, they put the people in charge of the government. This is the very thing that destroyed the old world order, when the people rose up and asserted Christ as their king, and that they were possessors of God's law and knew what was right and what was wrong, and that they had, by that right, a right to establish their own governments according to God's law, and rejection of Roman Catholic canon law, and rejection of the Pope's spiritual and temporal power. It was called Protestantism. It's almost non-existent in the world today in its pristine form. Now, there can be no attack upon any material part of that system without assailing this popular sovereignty and denying to the people the right of self-government. What this literally means is that the body of Christ is illegitimate. It cannot function independent of the Pope. That the body of Christ has no king, and it has no law but the papacy. Now, do you see the war that's taking place between the body of Christ and that of Satan? He says, when therefore we are told, as the Jesuits now tell us, that these secular institutions created by our fathers are sinful and heretical because they violate the divine law, as Pope Leo XIII, Pope Pius IX, and Pope Gregory XVI in our own time, and numerous other popes before them, have defined that law, we are confronted by the alternative of either resisting this assault in some effective method, becoming to ourselves, or of consenting to the papal policy of retrogression, returning to the old world order, which proposes to lead us back into a condition of humiliating dependence upon an alien power which teaches that popular governments contravene the divine law and have the curse of God resting upon them. That's right. The papacy says that the Protestant system, with Christ as our king and his law written upon our hearts, has the curse of God resting upon it. This can be none other than Antichrist. Now, we are no longer left to surmise this or to draw inferences with regard to it, which may be ingeniously and Jesuitically met by the pretense that they proceed from Protestant prejudices. The doors have been thrown open so wide by our liberalism and toleration that the ultimate end which the papacy seeks after is not brooded over in silence as it formerly was, but is plainly and distinctly avowed, so that it will be our own fault if we fail to discover the points at which our civil institutions are assailed. It'll be our fault if we allow our Protestant institutions to be assailed. Ignorance is no excuse for allowing the Roman Catholic Church, the Jesuits, and the followers and adherers to the theology and philosophies of Thomas Aquinas to overthrow our Protestant institutions, our Bill of Rights, our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, a government of, by, and for the people. We have no excuse to allow our government to fall to papal monarchism. We have no excuse to allow the New World Order to restore the Old World Order on a global scale. We have no excuse. Our government has been so well and wisely constructed that it does not interfere in any respect whatsoever with the freedom of conscience. On the contrary, it is protected by constitutional guarantees which we preserve with the most assiduous care. Do we really assiduously care for the preservation of our constitutional guarantees? If we assiduously care for our constitutional guarantees and liberties, why is our Constitution threatened? Why is it being overthrown? I question R.W. Thompson here. His whole book assails the indifference of Protestantism as the cause of the overthrow of our Constitution and Bill of Rights. I agree with R.W. Thompson that we should assiduously care for the guarantees, the constitutional guarantees of our freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, separation of church and state, the non-establishment clause, in order to maintain our independence. Without those guarantees in the Constitution, Rome's free to dictate. And that's exactly what's happening. He says, but the papal assailants of some of its most cherished principles avail themselves of this freedom, that is, freedom of religion, to justify their united exertions to restore the temporal power of the Pope. In other words, to deny everybody religious liberty. They're using the constitutional guarantee of religious liberty to overthrow that guarantee for everyone else but themselves. Well knowing that if that can be accomplished so that that is the Pope's authority, can be established here as they desire it to be, he would exercise his prerogative right to deny this same freedom of conscience to all except those obedient to himself, and would arraign us at the bar of the Roman Catholic Curia, that is the governing body of the Vatican, because under our constitutional guarantees we tolerate all the varieties of religious belief. So what do you think would happen to us once we were condemned as heretical by the Roman Catholic Curia? Well, history shows us there can be no doubt open religious persecution against non-Roman Catholics. He says, without the least disguise, these same assailants openly declare their purpose not to slacken their efforts until our system of popular education is entirely uprooted from the foundation, and our public schools are converted into papal conventicles, in other words, papal convents, where the disciples of Loyola, and you can read into that Thomas Aquinas, shall have supreme rule and be permitted to plant the principles and theological doctrines of Thomas Aquinas in every youthful mind. This accomplished, they would expect that the coming generations, instead of deriving patriotic instruction from the example of those who founded the Republic, would bow their heads in absolute and uninquiring obedience to all the doctrines and dogmas of the Pope. That means they would be Roman Catholic, wouldn't they? Substitute the decrees and encyclicals of the Pope and the canon law of Rome for the Constitution and laws of the United States, and discarding entirely the admonitions of our revolutionary fathers, would accept as infallibly true whatsoever the Pope should declare concerning the relations between the spiritual and the temporal power, that is, between the Church and the State. So the Pope would be the sovereign monarch of the United States of America. I mean, it all ends up in that. And the facts on the ground, post-Vatican Council II, is that's just exactly what's happened. You know, our nominal Protestants, I call them spitefully ecumenical evangelibellies, have brought this horror upon us. Not knowing the difference between Christ and Antichrist, being deceived by that papal power, have brought this Roman horror upon us. And there are no words adequate to condemn it. It is rebellion against the lawful throne of Almighty God, not the Pope, but Jesus Christ himself. Ecumenism is the destruction of Protestantism and independence and the restoration of the papacy, the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist. What a horror. What a reality. We'll be back after the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Stay tuned.
$100 days, 100 subscribers at $7 will bring FirstAmendmentRadio.com to the minimum level necessary to sustain it through 2015. Go to support.FirstAmendmentRadio.com. $7 a month. Really, you can afford that for our Protestant First Amendment rights and the gospel of the kingdom message. Where your heart is, there will your treasure be also. Go to support.FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a left behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
Record budget deficits, bankruptcies galore, and the U.S. dollar is at an all-time low. With today's gloomy economic outlook, safe investments are often hard to find. For over a decade, Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company has been helping people secure their future by investing in the precious metals. Melody has the honesty, integrity, and experience that is often lacking in the precious metals business. Let her put it to work for you. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to see Inquisition Update continue, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. We got to pay some bills. So let's ante up and see what we can do for Nicholas and keep the program going. Now, back to the book. It says, in this work, now we're speaking of the Jesuit-led Counter-Reformation. Remember, the Jesuit oath swears every Jesuit to destroy Protestantism everywhere it exists and to restore papal monarchism everywhere in the world. Okay, this is what we're speaking of, the Jesuit-led Counter-Reformation. This was an organization created right after the Protestant Reformation. It's a military wing of the Roman Catholic Church, warrior monks going about the world, uprooting Protestantism and uprooting democratic or republican forms of government for the purpose of restoring monarchism, and through that, global rule by the papacy. Now it says, in this work of plucking out every germ of patriotism, and you can equate patriotism as it's used here with Protestantism, the love and patriotic attitude that we have for our Protestant institutions, which this work of plucking out every germ of this patriotism, which instinctively grows and bears fruits in youthful minds. The Jesuits have been experts ever since Pope Julius III and Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit order, established a college at Rome to teach treason to the German youth. Now, those who missed the program, I'll briefly recap that right after the Protestant Reformation, which took place officially in Germany under Martin Luther, the Jesuits immediately went to war against Protestantism right in Germany. And what they did was they recruited the fertile minds of the German youth and brought them down to Italy to a college established by the Pope and by the Jesuits to teach Germans how to overthrow Protestantism and Republican forms of government, the Counter-Reformation. And then they would send these highly educated, well-trained, Jesuitized German youth back to their country and elevated them to priests and pastors in the churches and elevated them to powerful positions within the government with the attempt to overthrow the German Republic and to restore papal monarchism. Now, the same is being done here in the United States. The Counter-Reformation never changes its goal, never changes its means and methods. The end justifies the means, and by any means available to them, fair or foul, they intend to fulfill their oath to restore papal monarchism all over the world at the expense of Protestantism. Now, time and practice have increased their skill, and their disappointment at being compelled to witness the triumph of Protestantism while they have become fugitives among the nations has intensified their hatred of all free and independent governments. Pope Leo XIII, not forgetful of his own early Jesuit training, has signified his purpose to select them, the Jesuits, as the educators of American youth. Okay, it's the same strategy they used against Germany, so that they may be trained in the religious belief that our national independence is leading us to quote-unquote libertinism and ruin, and that they can only serve God rightly by forgetting home and country and by plucking out from their minds all sense of personal manhood and every ennobling quality, so that instead of becoming influential citizens of a free and progressive country, they may fit themselves for quote-unquote uninquiring obedience to a foreign and alien power, as the Jesuits themselves have done. This country, so blessed by the abundant fruits of the Protestant Reformation and of our popular form of government, must not be permitted to turn back to the old paths, which papal and imperial despotism has filled with pitfalls. The principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States must not be supplanted by papal and Jesuit dogmas, such as have been set forth by the ambitious popes and by Ignatius Loyola and his followers, in order to secure the complete triumph of monarchism over popular liberty. Rome wishes to enslave us all. If we wish to remain free and sovereign and independent and under the undisturbed rule of Christ, I'm speaking to the body of Christ, we must resist papal tyranny. Yes, we must all worship Christ. Read the gospel from beginning to end, Genesis to Revelation, and recognize that God has an opponent here on this earth that demands each and every one of us to bow to his knees and to kiss his ring and to obey his laws. He is a counterfeit, and he must be resisted. Who will stand up for me in that evil day? God asked the question, which one of us will stand up against Antichrist? He says the sentiment of patriotism is well nigh universal among the people of the United States, Roman Catholics as well as Protestants. Yes, many Roman Catholics believe that our form of government is the only right form of government, despite their Roman Catholic teaching in the churches and in the schools. He says the former, that is the Roman Catholics, that have the same desire as the latter, that is the Protestants, to participate in making the laws that govern them. Their Italian brethren, the Roman Catholics of Italy, had this same desire so intensely that they resorted to revolution and thus secured it in the only possible way, by abolishing the Pope's temporal power. Why then should they be urged with such untiring tenacity to restore again this temporal power and revive its evils? Why should it be demanded of American Roman Catholics that they organize into a political religious party, obedient to a papal envoy from Rome, and pledged under the solemn obligations of religious duty to reverse the judgment of their Italian brethren and fasten upon them a burden which they have thrown off? Why should they be required to accept a religion which teaches that mankind are by nature unequal, with some born to dominion and the multitude for obedience only? Why should they be commanded to treat as sinful and heretical civil institutions which now protect them and increase their temporal happiness? Why should it be continually sounded in their ears that the divorce of the state from the church, religious liberty, the freedom of speech and of the press are such offenses against the divine law as must not be condoned in this life and will not be forgiven in the next? These questions are not idle. They're not rhetorical questions. They demand an answer. These questions are not idle, but are full of meaning to those whom they are addressed, and could be multiplied almost indefinitely. They are sufficiently suggestive to show what there are few so blind as not to see, that the existing agitation about the rights of the Church and the passionate declamation employed by the Jesuits to maintain it have but a single object: the reconversion of the Pope into a temporal and imperial ruler of the Italian people against their consent. This, with these agitators, must be accomplished at every hazard, no matter what other consequences may follow. It is inculcated as religious duty, which could not be neglected without disobeying God. All the obedient, therefore, are commanded to take part in it, in disregard of all human laws forbidding the people of one nation to interfere with the domestic affairs of another. The Reverend author of the Pope's biography, speaking for and by the expressed authority of Pope Leo XIII himself, says that the abolition of the temporal power, quote, is an international wrong which all Catholics are bound to denounce and oppose until it is done away with, unquote. That's the command from the papacy. If you are a Roman Catholic, or if you are a devout Roman Catholic, then you are bound by religious moral dogma of the Roman Catholic Church to overthrow all civil institutions that do not obey the Pope. That includes the government of the United States. That includes the government of Italy, and Spain, and Portugal, and Germany, and England, and everywhere around the world. Roman Catholics have been called to war against all Protestant institutions. This is the clearly stated aim of the papacy, to exalt himself above the stars of God, to be God. That's what he intends to be. And he'll use every means at his disposal to do it, because the attitude of the papacy is the end justifies the means. That if it is, according to Roman Catholic teaching, the divine right of the Pope to rule the world and every man, woman, and child in it, as the vicar of God on earth, then if that is good, and it is according to the papacy, that's the only solution for the world's woes, is that the Pope be King of Kings and Lord of Lords, then it is the moral obligation of every Roman Catholic to bring that to pass. It is the object of every oath-spitting Jesuit to bring that eventuality to pass and to excuse every means available to do so. And I suggest to my listeners, as I have before, nuclear holocaust is not out of the question in order to bring the papacy to global supremacy. We're worried about nuclear exchange between Russia and the United States or China and the United States. That's all diversion. The real threat to the world's people is if the Pope is somehow effectively foiled, if the Jesuits are somehow effectively foiled in their goal to make the papacy the monarch of the world, they will resort to global nuclear annihilation. Listen, if you understand that the papacy is the vicar of Satan on the earth, what option do you think Satan would leave unused? If he knew that Christ's return was imminent, do you think that he would hesitate one moment if he had the capability of completely destroying this creation? I don't think he would. I'm certain that he wouldn't. I'm certain that he would use whatever means were at his disposal. Now, if there were ever a legitimate call for the destruction of all nuclear weapons, that's it. Because Satan and his vicar in Rome are the gods of this world, and they will not leave anything but smoke in their wake if they are defeated. I'm convinced of it. Now, how far God will allow them to go is the question. I mean, after all, this is his creation, no one else's. And his people live on this earth. And he will defend them. He will save them. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what limitations, since the end justifies the means, what limitations will the Jesuits, the papacy, the monarchs around the world, what limitations will they voluntarily place on themselves if this new world order is somehow foiled by a Protestant Reformation, a global Protestant Reformation, which we know is not likely to happen. I mean, God's kingdom is only a remnant of the world's people. I just want my listeners to get an overall perspective. He says, the Reverend author of the Pope's biography, speaking for and by the express authority of Leo XIII himself, says that the abolition of the temporal power of the Pope, quote, is an international wrong, and you must know that they have an international solution for the problem. He says it is an international wrong which all Roman Catholics are bound to denounce and oppose until it is done away with. That's the goal. Completely doing away with this rebellion against the Pope, his temporal power. Every Roman Catholic is commanded, on pain of excommunication, to do whatever they can to do away with all resistance to the temporal power of the Pope. And that must be spelled Protestantism. He says this is the command of the Pope, authoritatively uttered in imperial tones. King of Kings has spoken. He says it is sent out to all the Roman Catholics throughout the world who are required by it to defy the laws of the countries which protect them, because they are mere human laws, and to restore absolute monarchism to the Pope, because the divine law provides that mankind shall be ruled by kings and not by themselves. The Roman Catholic part of our population are seemingly content as they are in their peaceful and quiet homes where, with their wives and children around them, they are secured by Protestant laws in the right to worship God unmolested and according to their own consciences, as well as in their pursuit after happiness and prosperity. That's right, every Roman Catholic is protected by the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and its Bill of Rights. And yet, their Roman Catholic hierarchy, their Pope, their Jesuits, have insisted that those protections be removed. Are they prepared to place all this in jeopardy to minister to the pride and vanity of those who assume to be their leaders, who know nothing of domestic joys? Remember, they're celibate. They can't have wives or children. They can't relate to us. Why should we acquiesce to them, the celibate priesthood? They don't even know what humanity is all about. Are they prepared, the Roman Catholics of the United States and the world, are they prepared to place all of this liberty in jeopardy? To minister to the pride and the vanity of those who assume to be their leaders, their priests and their popes, who know nothing of domestic joys or peaceful homes or such sympathetic affections as grow out of the tenderest relationships of life, or of the laughter and chattering of innocent children, which make the heart glad? All the means that learning and eloquence and authority can employ will be invoked to make them so. And it is considered one of the most effectual of these to instruct them, as the Pope's biographer does with single complacency, that the Church at Rome has been always found upon the side of free thought in religion and popular self-government in civil affairs. Yes, that's what we were told in the book, The Ark and the Dove by J. Moss Ives, that the Roman Catholic colony of Maryland was the original fountain of Protestant liberty. Remember, the end justifies the means. They can twist the truth just like they can twist the Scriptures to justify their attempt to conquer the world for the Pope. Even so far as declaring that they were the ones who came up with the idea of religious liberty. Just name me one time in history when the papacy ever acknowledged any other form of worship but that which is propounded by Rome. Name me one time in history. Name me another time in history where God ever preserved the lives of those who oppose Him. There isn't any. It's literally amazing what the Vatican will attempt to do to justify itself and to preserve itself. All the means that learning and eloquence and authority can employ will be invoked to make them so, and it is considered one of the most effectual of these to instruct them, as the Pope's biographer does with singular complacency, that the Church of Rome has been always found upon the side of free thought in religion and popular self-government in civil affairs. I wonder when it'll ever happen that the Roman Catholic Church will claim credit for the Protestant Reformation or claim credit for the Magna Carta. Listen as we continue. He says, and to maintain this marvelous assertion, he boastingly claims that the great English Magna Carta, the foundation of our civil and religious liberty, was written, quote, with a Catholic pen, unquote, when he must have known, and undoubtedly did know, that Pope Innocent III, who claimed, as did Pope Leo XIII, to be God's vicegerent, with the apostolic power to build and destroy nations, to plant and overthrow kingdoms, cursed and anathematized that charter, the Magna Carta, because, as he said, it violated the divine law. It violated Roman Catholic canon law. He declared it null and void for that very reason. And he even excommunicated its authors and defenders as heretics, and said that if that charter, the Magna Carta, had been carried to Rome, it would have been consumed in flames kindled by a common hangman, as would also have been the bodies of the earls and the barons who extorted it from a craven-hearted king. The decree abolishing the temporal power of the Pope was also written by a Catholic pen. That's the truth. The abolition of the temporal power of the Pope was written not by Protestants, but by Roman Catholics, and he's speaking specifically of Italy, right in the shadow of the walls of the Vatican. That's right. History reveals that once Protestantism was known in the world, Roman Catholics chose liberty by throwing off the temporal power of the Pope. So what on earth do the Roman Catholics of this country Not to even mention those who were liberated by Christ 2,000 years ago who call themselves Protestants, or in most cases ashamed to call themselves Protestants. Why, in the name of God Almighty, would they wish to unite with that church, that Roman Catholic Church, the scarlet harlot of Revelation chapter 17, even on common ground? You know, I can resist abortion, but never touch Rome, never ally myself with Rome. What friend have I in the Roman Catholic Church? None. Why can't I just ally myself with Christ and leave Rome alone and to her fate? I don't need to be called a Roman to be called a Christian. They are mutually exclusive events. One is Christ and one is Antichrist, and it's up to God's people to finally see the distinction and make their position known and to alert everyone else within their hearing. We'll continue to do that tomorrow on the broadcast. We've run out of time. Thanks for listening this morning. You've been listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. We'll continue tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.